would have us to do. In Jesus' name we pray.
All right. Last week we finished up, or week before last, we finished up with it's actually the first plague, which was all the waters turning into blood. The Nile River is the lifeline of Egypt. It's the umbilical cord of Egypt. Everything with life comes from the Nile River. They depend on it. Without the Nile, then Egypt would not have been what it is or what it was. The Nile affects several countries. So when we're talking about this and when we're discussing this, you have to remember that not only is Egypt going to be affected, but modern day places are going to be affected also. The Sudan, parts of Africa, things like that. Of course, you've got Lake Victoria, which is in Africa, the largest lake that feeds the Nile, and then the Nile feeds off into the Mediterranean or the Great Sea, and then you have hundreds of little small streams and small rivers. The two great rivers besides the Nile is the Blue Nile and the White Nile, and they split off. So when these plagues happen, the first plague that happens is, of course, the Nile turning into blood, all the water turning into blood, and that's a ripple effect for the rest of the plagues. And what you have to remember in chapter 7, verse 22, I want to look at this real quick. And the magicians of Egypt did so with their enchantments, and the Pharaoh's heart was hardened. Neither did he hearken unto them, as the Lord had said. And Pharaoh turned and went into his house, neither did he set his heart to do this also. All the Egyptians dig round about the river for water to drink, for they could not drink of the water of the river. And when 7 days were fulfilled, after the Lord had smitten the river. Now, ponds, wells, streams, not only the river, water that they had stored up in sacred vessels, water that was sacred water that was found in temples. Anything that was H2O was affected with blood. There was no water anywhere. Absolutely none. So that is the first plague, and it affects everyone. So now it gets us to chapter 8, and we're going to be looking, and this is going to affect 5 gods in this, all right? 5 gods are going to be affected, not literally affected, but the false worship of these gods are going to be affected. The first plague, and if you study this, Bible historians really do not consider the water being turned into blood a plague. This is really, they say it actually starts with this one. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and call this the second one, all right, guys? So we're starting in chapter 8, verse 1. The first one did not affect Pharaoh. He did not turn the people, did not let them go into the wilderness to worship God. God hardens his heart, Pharaoh hardens his heart, and when 7 days is fulfilled, and the number 7 is spiritual completeness. That is what the number 7 is, spiritual completeness. The Lord created heaven and the earth and everything else in 7 days, which is a perfect number. So it is spiritual, perfect, spiritual completeness. That is what the number 7 means, okay? So when 7 days were fulfilled, the Lord had smitten the river. No water for 7 days. It did not rain for that 7 days. It was just blood everywhere. Okay? Now, we go to chapter 8. And it said, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, Go unto Pharaoh, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord, Let my people go, that they may serve me." That is what God commands and demands from all of his people, is for us to serve him, for us to worship him. That is why we were brought upon this earth, so we may serve God, we may worship God. If we do not worship and we do not serve God, the rocks will cry out and worship God. So that is what being a child of God is all about, worshiping God. Everything we do in our lives should point towards our focus on everything, absolutely everything. Work, school, friends, family. Everything should focus on worshiping God. If you ever study the Puritans, the one thing that they focused in their life was the worship of God. They didn't the jobs that they took the professions that they took, the trades that they were skilled at. The only reason they took those was so they could serve God. A lot of them, if you went into a trade as a school teacher, you used your teaching ability not only to teach children, but to also lead them to Christ. So that is what we should do as Christians, is our service should be first and foremost in our life to God. Everything we do. So what the whole point of this is that Pharaoh is trying to keep the people from going and following God. And that is just like Satan. His whole point is to keep people from following God. He cannot kill God. He cannot take away salvation. He cannot take away grace. But he can deny people in certain areas of worshiping God. He can tell them lies. He can bring things of the world that's pleasing to the eye. And to take our focus away from God, focus away from serving God. So that is what he says. He says, let my people go that they may serve me. Say that was the ultimate thing. Now, and it says, and if thou refuse to let them go, which he is going to refuse, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that, because you remember a couple of chapters when Moses was still in Midian, God told him what? I am going to harden Pharaoh's heart, and he's not going to let these people go. You're going to go up to him, you're going to tell him, he's not going to let them go, you're going to bring a plague, and you're going to go back to him, he's not going to let them go, and he's going to keep hardening his heart, and I'm going to do that also. So really, it's kind of odd to me that God tells him, says, this is what I want you to go say to him, and if he refuses, there's no if actually in there, he's going to refuse. It says, if he refused to let them go. Now remember, the whole Nile thing, all right, you have to remember. All right, look in verse 24 of chapter 7. And the Egyptians dug around the water to drink. They could not drink the water of the river. And when 7 days were fulfilled, after the Lord had smitten the river. Water's still in blood, isn't it? Does it say anything about him taking that away? Still affected, right? Now you also have to remember, these plagues not only affect the Egyptians, do you know who they also affect? The Israelites. The first time that you hear about these Israelites not being affected by these plagues is when you get to the plague of the flies, which is in chapter 8, and it starts in verse 22. That is when they are not affected. It's not going to affect the land of Goshen. There's a couple of plagues in here that does not affect the land of Goshen. I think it's that one, and it's actually the cattle dying. We'll have to get into that a little bit more, but the water turned to blood, the frogs, the lice, all of this is not only going to affect the Egyptians, but it is going to affect the Hebrews, because if you look in chapter 8, verse 23, and it says, and I will sever in that day the land of Goshen, in which my people dwell, that no swarms of flies shall be there. So he stops the plague of the flies, and it does not affect Goshen, which is where the Israelites are staying. All right? But the water and the blood, the frogs and the lice, if we get to the lice tonight, that is going to affect everyone, even the Israelites. So they're going to be affected by it also. Okay? Now, and it says, and the Lord spake unto Moses, verse 2, and it says, if thou refuse to let him go, I will smite all thy borders with frogs. With frogs. If we had I don't have my map on me. Egyptian map. I'm talking this plus all of this down here. All of that is going to be affected with frogs. All of it. We got a small pond behind our house, and at night when it's got water in it, it doesn't now, but when it has water in it, it sounds like there's 1 million frogs down there. That's one pond. That's small. Don't even cover an acre. Imagine 2 or 3, 4 or 5 countries being affected by this. Egypt, Sudan, parts of Ethiopia, parts of Africa, being affected by this. He says, I want to smite the borders. Nothing outside of Egypt is going to be affected, their borders. He said, I want to smite the borders. Egypt has 5 species of frogs. All right? Now, this is going to affect Heka, which is a female goddess. She is a woman that is portrayed with the head of a frog. All right? She is the goddess of childbirth. All right? That is her. The women during the time of Egypt, they would wear amulets around their ankles and around their wrists when they were giving birth to a child, and that was supposed to protect them from the death of the child, or the death of the mother, or a birth affected the child. So this is going to affect her. All right. Frogs. Now, these frogs is extremely, very, 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 very sacred, because these gods were known. They don't, but this is what they believe. They believe that these gods could take the form of the animals that they represented. So if you was walking down in Egypt and you was down at the Nile and you seen a frog, you'd think, hey, that could be heck of the female goddess. Okay? So it was forbidden, it was a death penalty to kill a frog. Could not kill one. Because if you killed it, you're probably killing the goddess. Sounds like people in India, doesn't it? Can't kill cows and things, all right? Now, she has a husband, Canaan. Y'all remember studying about him 2 weeks ago? He is the god of the mud of the Nile. He is the one that actually creates all people. He takes the mud from the Nile, puts it on the potter's wheel, and creates people. That is her husband. So not only is this going to affect her, it's going to affect him. All right? So it's affecting two gods right here. All right? Not only is it going to affect these two, it's going to affect the god Hapi, which is the god of the Nile. So this one plague is going to affect these three gods. All right? You remember this god was the one that was the god of the Nile, and he was the one that had the blood that ran through his body was actually the Nile River. So you have 1, 2, 3 gods that is going to be affected. So, death penalty to kill one of these frogs. All right? There's 5 species. Okay? Now, I want you to notice how every plague that is going to come is going to affect these gods, and is going to cause the Egyptians to question what they are serving. Now remember, there are three. The hierarchy in Egypt was you had Pharaoh, and then you had his priest. The priest was right under Pharaoh. So not only is this going to affect the Egyptians, it is going to affect Pharaoh, and then it is going to affect the priest. The priest was the type of people, they clean shaven, no body hair whatsoever. They was required to take at least 12 cold baths a day to cleanse their body. They could not come in contact with anything dead, nothing impure. They were very, what do you call these people? Don't like germaphobes. They didn't like stuff like that. So not only is this going to affect them, now remember, they would use sacred water from the Nile to bathe with. They now are considered unclean because they cannot bathe in the Nile because it has got blood in it. Well, what about their sacred vessels? It's got water in it. They're affected. So now you have the priests who are unable to shave. They've got all this hair growing on them now, and they cannot bathe. They cannot take their 12 baths a day, so now they are going to be affected. And you can see how these plagues is really having a ripple effect through all of Egypt, through all of their establishment, through all of their religion. So it's going to affect mostly her, but it's going to kind of a trickle-down effect. And you'll see that this, I want to read this. And it says, and the river shall bring forth frogs abundantly. That's zillions of frogs. You ever went down to a pond after a frog's had a bunch of tadpoles? One frog. I mean, there's hundreds of little things. That's one frog. All right? And then you got 5 species of frogs. And they also considered these to be very sacred because they could live not only in water, but they could live outside of water. All right? All right, so here we go. Which shall go up and come into thine house, and into thy bedchamber, and upon thy bed, and in the house of thy servants, and upon thy people, and in thy ovens, and in thy kneading troughs. Wow. Everywhere you go, there's going to be... Now, it's not... Sometimes if you ever see a movie or something like that they portray it, they'll show frogs just here and there. I honestly believe that it was like a carpet of frogs. You could not see the ground. You could not see anything. It was just frogs everywhere. Now, you have to remember that not only is these things coming out of the river, they're coming out of streams, they're coming out of ponds, they're coming out of everywhere. Now, not only is this going to affect her, but it's going to affect him also because he was the one that flooded. The Nile would flood at least once a year, and it would flood miles out into Egypt, And that is how they were able to farm and to grow their produce and to grow their crops, because the Nile would flood because of him. All right, this is what they think, because of him. Now, if you were a farmer back during this time and you were sitting outside before the plagues come, it was music to your ears to hear frogs, because that meant it had been flooded. You have a pond out there that you can water your gardens, you can feed your cattle, whatever. So to hear frogs, it was kind of music to your ears. It's going to get to a point where they are going to be sick of them. Beds everywhere. I mean, literally, there's nowhere you can go where there's not frogs. They're nasty, slimy. I don't like them. And when you pick one up, what's the first thing it does? Pees on you. All right? So this is when it says they're going to come up abundantly. And it's going to be not only in Pharaoh's house, it's going to be in his bedchamber, it's going to be on his bed, it's going to be in the house of his servants, it's going to be in the ovens. And they prop down the oven door, guess what? It's going to be frogs piling out. They're actually going to get sick of this God after a while. All right? All right, now. And all the frogs shall come upon thee, and upon thy people, and upon thy servants. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying to Aaron, stretch forth thy hand with thy rod over the streams, over the rivers, over the ponds, and cause the frogs to come up out of the land of Egypt. Now, when we see the move, I don't think that's actually in the movie, but if we was to have read that, we would actually think that Aaron would just kind of walk outside and place the rod of God or the rod of Moses over the Nile. Does it say that? What is Aaron required to do? Read that verse. Stretch the hand over the streams, and then over the rivers, and then over the ponds. Do you know what Aaron's got to do? He's got to go over with that rod. Okay? It does not. Now, we often think this is something that's just, Aaron walks outside, bam, there's frogs. It's got to take, this takes work. Okay? God is not going to make this easy for Moses or Aaron. They've actually got to get out there and work and do these things. All right? And when we read this, we think, well, it's just quick. This takes time to do. All right? Could you imagine, Eric, we see this guy walking, and he's sitting on your front porch. Here comes this guy with this thing, and he sticks it over your pond, and a bunch of frogs come out. Wow. And he's gone. And he's going all over the place doing this. All right? Now, and it says, and caused the frogs to come upon the land of Egypt. That is absolutely everywhere. Frogs everywhere. All right? Now, when does frogs croak? And whatever, at nighttime, they're going to be doing any sleep. Can't sleep. Can't sleep during the day because you know why? You got frogs in your bed. Can't do anything. You're going to go absolutely start raving crazy with these things. All right? Can't kill them. Why can't they kill them? They're sacred. They can't kill them. Could you imagine? And the magician, this is the stupidest thing I've ever read. And the magicians did also with their enchantments and brought up frogs from the land of Egypt. What did they just do? Made it worse. I mean that, and they do this quite often. Oh, you can do that. We can do that too. Watch. We're just going to bring up more frogs. All right. So not only do we have the frogs of Aaron and Moses, now we got the frogs of the magicians. Okay. And here we go. In Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, entreat the Lord that he may take away the frogs from me, from my people. They don't have a lot of use for her anymore, do they? No use at all for her. They don't have much use now for him. They don't have much use now for this one. Because before long, the people of Egypt are going to be begging the Israelites just go. All right? Take the frogs away from my people, and I will let the people go that they may do sacrifice unto the Lord. Moses said unto Pharaoh, glory over me when I entreat for thee, for my servants and for my people, and destroy the frogs from thee and thine house, that they may remain in the river only. And he said, tomorrow, and he said, be it according to thy word, that they may know us that there is none like the God of our Lord. He's asking basically to Pharaoh, when do you want me to do it? Pharaoh says, wait till tomorrow. I want to do it now. I'd want to be gone instantly. All right? Everywhere you see, all over that country, frogs everywhere. Everywhere. Okay? All right, here we go. And the frogs shall depart from thee and from thy houses and from thy servants and from thy people. They shall remain in the river only. Okay? Just put them back in the river. All these frogs. The river that's made out of blood now. Okay? And Moses and Aaron went out from Pharaoh, and Moses cried unto the Lord because of frogs which he had brought against Pharaoh. And the Lord did according to the word of Moses. And the frogs died out of the houses and out of the villages and out of the field. And they gathered to themselves, and they gathered together upon heaps, and the land stank. All right? So not only do you have frogs to begin with that are probably mashed everywhere because people are stepping on them. Then you got cows stomping on them. And you got just frogs everywhere. Then they die out. And everywhere you look, there are piles and piles and piles and piles of dead frogs. Do you see how these plagues lead into another? It's not a plague of frogs, and then we're going to send a plague of man-eating tigers after you. What happens usually when something like this happens? Insects start coming. Pestilence start coming. Parasites start coming. So how all of these plagues kind of blend in one to another. And it says, and they were heaps of them all over, and the land stank. All right? You got Pharaoh. He's unclean now. You've got the priests. They're unclean because they can't wash. All right? And everybody, everywhere you go, it's stinky, nasty frogs everywhere. Crystal went to the Dominican on a mission trip a couple of years ago, and she said the one thing that stuck out in her mind in Dominican, tell them what they do with their garbage. They just pile it up in the streets. She said, you'd be riding down the road, but just piles and piles and piles of garbage. You know, they don't have the sanitation that we do here. And that's the way it was there. In Egypt, everywhere you went, there's those frogs just piled up, just hundreds of feet high probably. All right? Can't get rid of them. Can't do anything with them. And when Pharaoh saw that there was respite, he hardened his heart, and he hearkened not unto them as the Lord had said. And the Lord said unto Moses, say unto Aaron, stretch thy rod that they may smite the dust of the land. What is 99.9% of Egypt? Desert. Keep that in mind. The only good part of Egypt is basically this little piece right here, which is Goshen, which is where the Israelites live. The rest of it, what's all that brown stuff? Sand. All right, keep that in mind, all right? So we got the frogs. They're piled up everywhere stinking. All right? There's no such thing as Lysol or Febreze or anything like that. They don't have windows to get the stink, to block the stink out. It's all open air. Everything's open air. 100 degrees in the shade, and you got these frogs, and they're rotting. Okay? You can't burn them. I mean, there's no such thing as gasoline. Can't do anything. You just got to let them rot away. All right. Huh? Can't eat them. They're sacred.
Even if they're dead?
Would you want to eat one after it's been laying out in the sun and stinking and nasty? You probably would. And the Lord said unto Moses, stretch out thy rod and smite the dust of the land, that it may become lice throughout the land of Egypt. All right? You can go to the beach, scoop up one hand of sand. There's millions of grains of sand in your hand. That's just one thing. Imagine all of Egypt, him striking the land. And read what it says once again. And smite the dust of the land, and it may become lice. Dirt, dust, anything. The same dust that God created man with, is now he's going to use that dust to judge Egypt. Now, here we go. And they did so, and for Aaron stretched out his hand with his rod and smote the dust of the earth, and it became lice in men. This is also the Hebrew word for mosquito, for gnat, type of buzzing, aggravating little varmint pestilence. Okay? And in beast and all the dust of the land became lice throughout all the land of Egypt. All right, so now we got the Nile. Every stream, every river, everything's become blood. Now we have dead heaps of frogs everywhere that stink beyond cannot imagine. All right, they're still having to deal with that. And now, I want to read this again. And the dust of the earth became lice. How much lice is that? I don't think their number even goes that high. Everywhere. So now the priest cannot cleanse themselves for purity because they don't have any water. They are unclean now. Pharaoh is unclean. All of Egypt is unclean. Do you know what this is a type of? Tribulation. When I was at Latham, we done a study on Wednesday nights on Revelations, and we looked at all the judgments, and they're eerily resemble the effect that these have on Egypt. All the water being turned into blood, every ocean, everything all over the world. Fish die, sharks die, whales die, everything dies all over the oceans. Can't do anything with them, can't go inland far enough to get away from the stink. And this is basically the same thing. You have lice, and there's no antibiotics, there's no, what is that lice shampoo, Red, whatever it's called. You can't do anything to get rid of them. So you're scratching. And once you start scratching, what causes that? That causes a sore. Keep scratching, and that becomes infected. And then see how this starts off. The Black Plague, I got a book on it in Europe that took place. Started off, hundreds of thousands of people died because of it was called a brown lice that got on mice. And that's where it started. Little thing, you can't even see them. They're little white little doohickeys. And Aaron takes his rod, strikes the ground, and every bit of this. Could you imagine being out there and all of a sudden you're out there doing piling up frogs, with your shovel, and you look and the ground starts moving. And it makes you itch. I've everybody's come sitting here doing this. All right, the ground starts moving. And next thing you know, they start jumping. And they're all over. They're in your bed, they're in your clothes, they're everywhere. All right? And they don't only affect Egyptians, they're affecting the Israelites. You know who else it affects? It's going to affect Moses. It's not Moses, it's going to affect Pharaoh. He's supposed to be the supreme. Now, this not only affects, I'm not sure involved that, don't I? There's a God by the name of Gib. He is the God of the earth. And he has a twin sister, Nut. She is the God of the skies. They're twins, or brothers and sisters. All right? She is portrayed as, she is stretched out kind of in an arc-like, which is symbolic of the sky. And he is lying under her, stretched out, symbolic of the earth. Okay? Their brother and sister. He is portrayed also, that's why I didn't want to write this down, as a goose. Why? I'll tell you in a minute. He is portrayed as a goose. He actually has a feather. His statue, or the hieroglyphics they found in tombs, portray him with one on top of his head. And the reason is they believe that the earth was hatched by I think we don't want to say this, all right? This is what they believe, all right? Okay. The first sound ever heard on the earth, the first sound that's ever heard according to these people, was the great goose laying the great egg, which is the earth. Okay? This egg splits open, and from it, he comes out, she comes out. They also call him the great cackler, because geese cackle, I guess, I don't know. But that is is going to affect his sister. All right? And that is what they believe. And they also believe, since he is the God of the earth, when they would bury people in the earth, they would actually think they buried these people in his body, his literal body. Okay? That is how they believed. How they come up, if you can Google it online. There's a book called The Book of the Dead, which is basically everything you need to know about Egyptian culture, Egyptian worship, Egyptian gods. They have spells and incantation. I like how jump in that book. You can read it if you want to.
Are these gods human beings?
Yes, they have bodies as humans. But sometimes, like, he looks like a normal human. They all have long robes. Of course, she has the head of a frog.
They're not real, though.
No, these are not real. You actually think there's a lady walking around?
Well, I mean, no, but I mean, I see what she's asking.
Yeah, no.
Could have at one time, could have been a person. And
No.
This is all fiction.
No. These are not real people. They think they're real. They think they're great gods. This is how they think they look.
But they do not take human form. Is that what you're saying? Or?
No, they don't know. They thought they could take human form, but in reality, they do not take human form. They actually think that these gods, for instance, you couldn't kill a goose, because if you killed a goose, you'd be killing him, because they think that he could reincarnate himself into a goose.
Well, you'd have to have a handbook. What do you say who I can kill?
Yeah, in actuality, according to the Book of the Dead, there's over 2,000 gods that they worship.
Oh my goodness.
A god for everything. Now, these were not actual people. This is what they believe. This is the gods that they serve. So, you have husband, wife, brother, and sister. They're twins. They married. They actually have, I'm saying it like they're real people. But according to their beliefs, let me put it that way. According to their beliefs, they believe they had 4 other children, and we'll get into that later. But no, these are not real, no. All right? So, this is going to affect them. It's going to affect their beliefs in them. And they actually think this God right here, when they would have an earthquake, they thought it was him laughing.
Oh my goodness.
Seriously. Okay, so this is why. I mean, now you see how I don't know how to. I don't want to say dramatic, but to the extreme God had to go through to try to get their attention. You know, and how they could not accept the fact that we worshiped a God that you couldn't see. We didn't know what he looked like. We couldn't say, well, he's here or he's there. They could point to their false gods and say, well, now that's our God. We can see him. We can see the sky. We can see the earth. We can see a frog. That's why they had such a hard time with believing in a God that you couldn't see. Remember when the Apostle Paul was at Mars Hill, I believe. And they had all these statues of gods, God for this, God for that. And they had a statue to the unknown God. Okay, so all these are wrong. We're going to worship this guy just in case. I read a story of a guy that was in World War II. He was an atheist. He was in a foxhole, and in battle and all that. And after he got through, he was talking to one of his buddies, and he said, "Man, I was converted in that foxhole." He said, "To what religion?" He said, "All of them." He said, "I want to make sure I covered it all." And that's what these people thought, and that's what the people at Mars Hill thought. They thought we know that there's some. They think there's some gods out there, but just in case we're wrong, we're going to build an altar to this unknown God. All right, and that's how they live. I mean, it's like she said, you had to have a book to go by. All right, now, and the magicians, keep this in mind, the lice is everywhere. So not only you got stinky frogs, you got bloody water, now you got this lice that's come up. It is just, you couldn't, if you was a real estate agent, you'd be hard pressed to try to sell land there. I mean, you could not sell anything there. I mean, it was, and imagine everybody that is around. You know when they would invade countries, when they were down on their luck, when they were down military-wise, leadership-wise, financially, and these Egyptians was worried All right, now, let's keep going. We're going to have to quit here in a second. And it says, and the magicians did also with their enchantments to bring forth lice. Why?
To prove that they could.
Okay, but they could not. Thank God. I mean, I'm sure the Egyptians were like, good, man, I'm glad they couldn't. Oh, you think you can do that? Watch me. And they go out there and it's like, please don't bring up no more lice. They're out there, oh, you think you can do that? And you watch this. You know. All right, here we go. They could not. So there were lice upon man and upon what? Cows, dogs, cats, horses, gooses. Everywhere had lice. Everything was scratching. Everything was itching. I've noticed some of you. I swear I've seen, Paul, you don't have it. Quit rubbing your hand. You don't have lice. Okay? And the magicians did also their enchantments to bring forth more lice, just so they could do it. Then the magician said unto Pharaoh, finally, all right, this is the finger of God. Yeah, it is. And Pharaoh's heart was what? Hardened. And he hearkened not unto them as the Lord had said. From the Mediterranean down some 4,000 miles that way, guess what? It was frogs, no water, and lice everywhere you could turn. Everywhere. Imagine your kids living in this. And we think this is bad. The last plague is the absolute worst. When people start... And then you got to remember... the suicide rate was probably through the roof. I mean, in all honesty, how could a normal, sane man live through this? Seriously. Your kids are suffering with it. They're laying in bed at night squalling, crying, Mama, I'm itching, do something. I can't. I'm just as in bad a shape as you are. So this is affecting everyone. They cannot escape this. It's just a circle that's going. And the Israelites are being affected. But God is going to put up his hand. He's going to stop. And this is a type of grace. Now, these plagues, as odd as they are, and as cruel as we think they are a type of grace. Because God could have walked in there in an instant and wiped out the whole bunch and let the people go. But you see how God is. And he's trying to, and he's bringing these plagues, and he's bringing things to this country. And I think that America, even now, I think is being judged by God, being plagued by God. What is the one thing that gets us more than anything? Money. This is not only affecting their physical state, but it is affecting them in the pocketbook. Okay? Can't sell cows. They all got lice. I mean, so, and they can't eat anything. You know why? Got nothing to drink. So they can't make any money. And when God wants to get people's attention, he always does it financially. Always does it financially. He does it either through war, or does it through famine, does it through pestilence. It amazes me how people can get real close to God, and then when the bad things end, they quit. I remember, when was the first, was it in 90, when we first invaded Iraq? I think it was 90. Dad was pastoring up at First Baptist of Rainsville, and this is when he was running probably about 500 a Sunday. I mean, you could not have, when that war started, you could not have put another person in that church. Every church on Sand Mountain was packed full until it ended. And guess what? People forgot. After 9/11, probably same here. I mean, it was Katie barred the doors, people piling into church. And then after everything, the dust kind of settled. What happened?